The Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, ending nearly 50 years of constitutional protections for abortions. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm Dr. Nicole Cross. That decision came down this morning. Our Rena Diamante has the latest from Washington, D.C.
It is truly a historic moment here at the U.S. Supreme Court. In the case of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, justices have ruled that abortion rights are no longer constitutionally protected. In a 5-4 decision, the justices have overturned the landmark Roe versus Wade decision, upending nearly 50 years of legal precedent and clearing the way for states to criminalize the procedure and severely restrict it. Justice Samuel Alito wrote the majority opinion, and he said that the court's ruling in Roe was egregiously wrong from the start and that its reasoning was exceptionally weak. That language is similar to what we saw in a draft opinion that was leaked weeks ago that showed how the court was ready to strike down Roe. 4 of the court's other Republican-appointed justices sided with Alito. Abortion providers and abortion rights advocates have been preparing for this moment. Demonstrators have already broken out here at the Supreme Court. Stay with us here on Spectrum News. We'll bring you more coverage and analysis into this extraordinary decision on air and online. For now, in Washington, Rena Diamante, Spectrum News.
Thanks, Rena. Joining us now with some perspective is a legal expert and former president of the Dallas Bar Association, Rob Crain. Rob, it is great to have you with us. What is your reaction to the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade?
Now, based on the draft opinion we saw weeks ago, this was not surprising, at least in the short term. Obviously, the bigger picture here is we're looking at a revisiting of our Constitution, and in particular our 14th Amendment, which is where the court had turned to find the right to privacy, to establish Roe v. Wade, as well as other rights, such as the right to marry, the right to take contraception, and so forth. So it is a monumental day in American history in looking at how we interpret the Constitution.
It definitely is. Now, before it became a Supreme Court case, Roe v. Wade was a Texas lawsuit. Share the history of the case.
Well, I mean, obviously it goes back to early 1970s, and Roe percolated its way up. A child was born in that case, and it made its way up to the court with a divided court at the time, and the court decided that in looking at the Constitution, there is no statement about abortion. In 1770s, when our founding fathers were writing a Constitution, they could not cover every aspect of life that might exist then or even now. And in that 14th Amendment, the Due Process Clause, that they found that there are certain rights that they felt like, even though they weren't touched upon directly, are covered by that 14th Amendment process, and have said since before Roe, they looked back at the Griswold decision, which the court said, look, we may not talk about contraceptives, and it may not have been discussed back in the 1770s, but we believe that married couples have the right to choose to have and use contraception in their family planning. And so they took that Griswold decision and applied it to Roe and said the same policies apply here, is that even though abortion is not mentioned in the Constitution, there is that right to privacy, that right to make your own personal family decisions about whether to have an abortion at the early stages of pregnancy.
The High Court's decision radically changes the reproductive health care landscape in Texas and beyond. Break down the trigger ban that will go into effect 30 days after a judgment.
Right, so there are trigger laws that have been put in place by I think about 13 states, Texas being one of those. And just so everybody appreciates and understands, the Supreme Court's the guardian of the Constitution, and they said that, in this case, abortion is not protected by the Constitution. Therefore, the states or the federal government, the federally or state elected officials decide as to whether or not they want to allow or not allow abortion, or somewhere in between. And so there are trigger laws that were put into place in 13 states that say, all right, if Roe v. Wade gets overturned, then we automatically ban abortions in our state as well. And there's some different language in the different trigger laws, but in its basic effect, many states will have a little bit of a waiting period, and then they will trigger an abortion ban across the state. And there were other states as well that may not have had trigger laws, but the state laws that were on the books at the time of Roe, or even a little later, those are now in effect. And so many of those banned abortions. And so I think there's about 23 states that will immediately or shortly hereafter automatically ban abortion.
All right, I know this is something we will continue to talk about in the days, weeks, and months to come. Thank you for sharing your expertise, Rob Crain, legal expert. We appreciate that.
Anytime.
Of course. Well, as Rob mentioned, Texas is one of 13 states that will be almost immediately impacted by the overturning of Roe v. Wade. According to Attorney General Ken Paxton, trigger laws in Texas will go into effect 30 days after a formal judgment. Paxton says that, quote, without further action by the Texas legislature, abortion will soon be clearly illegal in Texas. Reactions to the Supreme Court's decision are pouring in nationwide this afternoon. President Biden spoke to the public about the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Take a listen.
Today, the Supreme Court of the United States expressly took away a constitutional right from the American people that it had already recognized. They didn't limit it, they simply took it away. That's never been done to a right so important to so many Americans. But they did it. It's a sad day for the court and for the country.
All right, so you heard from President Biden saying that it is a sad day for America, a sad day for those who are abortion providers, but many anti-abortion rights advocates say that it is a victory. They are calling it a victory. Our continuing coverage continues on the other side of this break. Stay with Spectrum News 1.